One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. I am really surprised at today's episode, simply because I've never talked about this outside of Profit Podcasting, my digital course. And I am like, what in the world? Why have we never actually dedicated an entire piece of content to your podcast main theme? And I think it's because it often gets rolled into the introduction of an episode. So if you go to my YouTube channel, you can find all kinds of videos on what to have in your podcast intro and what to do in your outro and like the different formatting pieces of your podcast, but we've never just singled out your podcast main theme. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? So in today's episode, I'm going to break down what a main theme is for your podcast and why you need one. But I want to just start by saying what a main theme is for a podcast is exactly what you just heard. It is a pre-recorded piece of audio that you insert either at the very beginning of an episode, like as soon as someone hits play, that's what they hear. Or it could be after the hook of an episode. Like I said, I've done several YouTube videos that I'm going to link to in the show notes where I talk about how to round out the introduction of your podcast episodes, but I want you to think of it as like you have your beginning, your middle, and your end. Well, today we're going to focus in on the introduction, but even more so, we're niching down even further, and we're just going to talk about your podcast main theme, because this is something that we haven't really covered. And it is actually a lot more important than you think. And this is an ever-going learning process for me, because on the surface and as a brand new podcaster, I would say, oh yeah, you need one of those, because then you don't end up saying the same thing over and over and over again. And to be honest, that's why I created my very first pre-recorded, like, okay, I'm going to record this thing and I'm going to drop it into every single podcast episode. The main reason why I did that is so I didn't have to say the same thing over and over and over again. I'm going to link to a recent YouTube video that I did in the show notes. So everything we talk about today, crystalprofit.com, episode 267 is where you're going to find these videos. But I did a recent video where I went back, y'all. I went really far back, like the first 20 episodes of the Rookie Life podcast, which is what this podcast was originally before we rebranded. And I found some of my old show notes. And I say show notes because this is like what I use to plan my content and how I really came up with what I was going to talk about whenever I was recording my episodes. And I looked back and I was like, oh my gosh, like these were scripts. They were straight up scripts of what I was going to say. If you want to see it, like I said, go watch the YouTube video. I literally said, hi, I'm Crystal, and this is episode 24, and this is what we're going to talk about today. And as always, like I would say the same thing in the introduction, and the only thing that I was changing was the episode number. So I was literally every single week saying the same exact thing, and I got so sick of it. I was annoyed with it. I don't even know if my audience, like at that point, honestly, like I love my audience and I care about what you think, but I, at that point, did not care if you really enjoyed me reading it. I was sick of saying it every single week. It was a boring part of the process for me. So I was like, oh gosh, if I don't like this, and if you've been around here for a little bit, you know, I say this all the time, if there is friction in your content creation process, you need to ask why. Why? Or you don't enjoy something. It's not fun for you anymore. Why is that? Ask yourself. Say, why do I not enjoy this? And for me, it was because I'm repeating myself every time. I couldn't genuinely say the same thing over and over and over again because it just felt canned anyway. So I thought, why don't I just say it one time really good with all the energy, and I will record that and I will drop it into every episode. So that's what you hear now. Typically in the introduction for this podcast, we'll have a short hook that could be from 30 seconds up to 90 seconds of me telling you a little bit about, hey, this is what you're going to learn in today's episode, or this is why I talked to today's guest, or there's something in there that's going to immediately have you saying, oh, I can't wait to listen to this. This is going to be really good. Or, oh, I've never thought about that before. Or maybe you're saying, I don't really care about that episode. I'll come back next week. I don't really care about this one. I'll check out the next episode. And that's okay too. I know I don't consume every podcaster's content that I listen to, but I think it's important to have that hook in the beginning. And then right after that is when you hear the music fade in, and it's where you hear the main theme of the Profit Podcast actually playing. And I meant to look this up. Hang on. We're live here. Like we're not actually live. I'm recording by myself. I'm saying I'm live while I'm recording, but I am going to see how long my main theme actually is. And because my recording software is not going to tell me while I'm actually recording, let me click in here. You're going to hear me clicking around in my Google Drive. I have everything saved, and I have a folder just for my podcast main theme. And I can tell you how long it is because I don't think it needs to be very long. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So it's 33 seconds. So from the time that you first hear the music playing, and then typically I will edit my episodes to where you can kind of hear the music fading out, and then like my voice starts again. Between all of that, it's around 33 seconds. And the reason why is before, my first pre-recorded segment, I think, was almost a minute, maybe a minute and a half. And I would listen back to an episode and say, Oh my gosh, that's way too long. That's way too long. I bet everybody that's listening is fast forwarding through all of that and they don't care. They're like, oh my gosh, this is okay, like I listen to this podcast every single time and I have to sit through a minute or a minute, a half of this every single week. No, thank you. And it's because I'm putting myself in the place of my audience, and I know that you don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear it every single time. And if you are a regular listener, there's a good chance that you hit that 15-second fast forward button. You're like, oh, this is her main thing. I'm just going to boop, boop, like quick tap, 2 taps, and you know that it'll fast forward 15 seconds and another 15 seconds and you're done. And then you're on to the next thing. Is this just something I do? I know I do this. Y'all know if you've been around here, the Office Ladies podcast is my favorite podcast. And I know when their podcast main theme comes in and I can just hit the fast forward button like 2 or 3 times if I don't feel like listening to it. And that's okay. It's okay. It's the same thing about watching TV and you fast forward through the commercials. Or, okay, let's talk about this real fast because this is another way to compare your podcast main theme to another type of content that you consume. I always think about Friends and The Office. So I would watch The Office all the time. This is really back when it was on Netflix. I don't watch it as much. Just like as on a regular basis, I'll catch it when it's on, we have YouTube TV. And if it's on there, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll watch it, but it has commercials there. So I don't typically sit down and watch it. It's one of those things you put on the background when you're making dinner, right? You do this too. I do it with friends too. But whenever I was streaming it on Netflix, there was always that button at the top or, somewhere on the screen where I could click skip intro. So that intro part is their main theme. It's like the opening sequence to the show, and it's the same every time, or at least, it is typically the same, but over the years, over the different series that they put out, or not series, I don't want to say that, the different seasons. That's what I was like, I know it was an S word. That's what I was looking for. The different seasons, they may change up some of the scenes that they have in the background, but the music stays the same. And the main characters that are featured stay the same. And it's the same for Friends, right? We have Friends on HBO Max, and we watched the reunion, and it was awesome and all the things. But if I'm watching Friends on HBO Max, they usually have like an opening scene, and then they will go into the main theme, and it gives you the option to skip it right there. Okay, so I've given several examples of what a podcast main theme is, or what it can be, or what you could compare it to. But now I want to go into the deeper reasons why you need one. Because I think it's great if you're just getting started and you are just recording yourself. Like maybe you don't even have music at all. You're like, it's just me talking and I need to get going because I got to start somewhere. Crystal, you tell us we got to start somewhere. So I'm just getting started. That is fantastic. Keep that up. Keep going. But if you're looking to level up, or if you've said, man, I am saying the same thing all the time in every episode, and you want to create a podcast main theme, I have a few suggestions for you. First, keep it short. If you have a main theme right now that is 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes long, I recommend you shortening it. Yes, that means re-recording it. Yes, it means trimming it down, but I think that shorter is better, especially with people's attention spans. And if you have someone that is brand new to your podcast and they are coming for a very specific interview, a very specific episode, and they come and they listen and you're, talking for 2 minutes just about what they can expect, it could turn some people away. I am pleasantly surprised, Crystal. I expected a typical company tutorial. I was so happy to see you doing a show and tell. Thank you. This is a testimony from Kathy, who is one of our Profit Podcasting students. She left this comment about one of our tech library tutorials. Yes, if you are part of Profit Podcasting, I do walkthroughs, step-by-steps of how I actually edit my podcast every single week. We have some fantastic tutorials. So if technology is the thing holding you back from starting your podcast, Profit podcasting would be perfect for you. Go to crystalprofit.com/course to learn more. And we would love to welcome you into the program that has helped hundreds of podcasters get their show up and running in less than 30 days. So again, go to crystalprofit.com/course. Okay, let's get back to the episode.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants. Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
It's kind of like the idea of on YouTube. Oh my gosh, y'all. YouTube comments just crack me up. Like I have started this like WTH, like what the hell are these people talking about on YouTube? Because I get the most obnoxious comments that are just like people complaining. I was like, oh, you went on and on for 5 seconds about this one thing. And I'm like, whatever. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about anymore. So I pay attention to the people that are coming there to actually learn about podcasting and not just criticize a video that I made. But I get frustrated when I watch other YouTube creators that just go on and on and on about their backstory, where most of the time we just get to the point, like just chop to it. Come on, we just want to know what the deal is. And I think that we can do that as podcasters by not creating a podcast main theme that goes on and on forever, because it's not only going to deter current listeners from like, okay, they're just going to get in the habit of fast forwarding through things. And you don't really want them to do that. Because what if you said something really important? What if you started having ads, or you started having other promotional spots within your episodes? You don't want them just to get used to fast forwarding through anything that has your music or has something that is, related to an ad. So it's really important to keep those on the shorter side. But also you don't want to, kind of discourage the brand new listener that's like, oh my gosh, this person just talked about all their own accomplishments and how incredible they are. But I don't want to listen to someone that's self-centered. And maybe this is just my personal opinion. I'm projecting on other podcast hosts that I've listened to. I'm like, it's fantastic that you've done all these 50,000 TED Talks and you're a billionaire who lives on a tropical island and all the, I'm like, I don't really care. Like, just teach me some of the things that you were going to talk about that actually make sense and that can help me on my journey. So instead of like, yeah, I'm just totally projecting at this point, because now I'm like, that sounded really self-centered, but I'm just going to go with it because it's my content consumption habits. Okay. Oh, all the therapy sessions. I need them all. Guys. Okay. So let's talk about why you need a podcast main theme. We talked about what it is, what it can be. I gave you some examples, but the reason why you need to have one is very simple. Branding. It's branding. That's what it is. It gives you an opportunity to set yourself apart from all the other podcasters out there. And while I said just having audio only or not like really using something that's pre-made, it works great. If that's where you're at in the game, that's fantastic. Maybe I'm talking to that person that's used the same pre-recorded audio for a long time, or someone that's been thinking about doing this. So if you're looking for ways to level up your podcast, this is it. But I do have a few guidelines, and this is kind of where we're going to close out this episode today. So I have 3 guidelines that we've kind of hit on a little bit today, but the first one is keep it short. I really recommend anything from 15, I know that sounds really short, but I've heard them, 15 to 45 seconds max. And like I said, mine is 33 seconds, and that includes a little bit of like intro music and there's a little bit of outro. So my actual message of me speaking may only be like 20 seconds and the rest of it is music fading in and out. So I really want you to, you got to think about this, right? Like, and I'm going to talk about what to say in it in a second, but when it comes to the length, keep it short, keep it concise. This is not the time for you to tell your life story. It is the time to hook your audience in and telling them you're the expert, you're the person that they need to listen to every single week. You're the one that's perfect to learn from, or you're the one that's going to entertain them and bring the energy that they need to hear every single week, but keep it on the short side. This is really, really important. The second thing is I want you to make sure that you're calling out your audience. I want you to explicitly say, this is who this podcast was created for. So you hear me in my main theme, I'm like, this podcast is for entrepreneurs who don't want, like, you looking for the time-saving shortcuts to help you create your podcast. It's not for someone that just wants to create a podcast, right? Because that is a very broad audience. I want you to know this is for entrepreneurs. You're looking for those quick wins. You're looking for help with content creation. You're looking for help with technology and organization and how to have a better business model and how to grow your email list. But I don't say all those things. I keep it really short and to the point because I don't want to lose you in all the different ways that I could talk about how I'm using my podcast to help entrepreneurs. But it's so important to make sure that you call out your audience. If there's a specific name, I'm going to talk about Kathy for a second. Kathy is someone in our audience. She's one of our Profit Podcasting students. She's actually going to be on the podcast soon. I know I've teased her interview before. I'm really excited for that to come very soon. But she is talking to caregivers on her podcast, people that are caring for a spouse, an aging parent, or someone who they need help. They need care. So these are the people that she's talking to. She's not talking to moms. She's not just talking to spouses. It is a very specific subset category of people who are caregiving for their loved ones or their friends or someone that they are close to. So that is who she calls out in her podcast. So if you have a specific name that you can use, online business owners, entrepreneurs, students, college students, parents of kids who are, empty nesters, like whatever it is, call it out in your podcast main theme. And then the third thing, this is like, remember, we don't really talk about rules around here. They're more so guidelines, but this is the third guideline is tell people why they should be listening. And everything that we talked about that should be in your main theme should feel a little familiar because we've talked about this before when we talked about your podcast description. This is very different from your episode description is what people see when they listen to an individual episode on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. Like that is your episode description. I'm talking about your podcast description. So if you host your podcast with Buzzsprout, this is what you see under your podcast settings. And you go in, you're like, oh, what is this podcast about? Like, what is your podcast description? That is basically what is on your podcast main theme. It's essentially the same information. So what you could do essentially is read your actual podcast description out loud and time yourself, or you could record it. You could read it and record it and say, oh, that was about 20 seconds, or that was about 30 seconds, or that was only 10 seconds, and see how long it would be, because that is a great starting point. That is a great skeleton. You could use the bones of that framework and kind of build it out or shrink it down, but that is a great place to get started. And that's what we always talk about here. We just got to get started somewhere. So use that. If you have nothing else, you're like, I have no idea where I would get started. That's where you start. Go to your podcast description, and that is where you should get started. I'm going to link to an episode that we've done previously about your podcast descriptions and show notes. So if you need a refresher on what you should have in there, go listen to that episode. But that's all I have for you today. And I hope that you are inspired to add a little pizzazz to your podcast with your podcast main theme, because in the end, I will automatically recognize those podcasts. Like if I just hear a faint noise of that podcast on YouTube, or I hear it on social media, or I hear, like, it triggers something in your brain. And I was listening to a Gary V episode, Gary Vaynerchuk. If you don't know who he is, I'll link to in the show notes where he talked about this, but he talked about sonic sound. And I'm like, what does that even mean? But he's saying that our brains will associate certain sounds to certain brands. And I'm going to link to it because it was a fascinating podcast episode. It was so good. I highly recommend you going and listening to it. But this is why branding with your podcast main theme is very, very important, because the more you tie a certain sound, a certain phrase, something to your brand, that is how you stand out. That is how you become recognizable among all of the other 2 million podcasts that are out in the world now. So branding is one of those things that people always ask me about. And it's a lot more subtle than just talk about your show all the time and show up in a certain way. It is these little pieces of detail that you can put into your podcast that will help you stand out from all the other shows. So again, go to crystalprofit.com/episode 267 for all the things that we talked about here today. But that's all I have for you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you so much for being a listener of the show. I really appreciate everybody that tunes in, because it just brings my heart so much joy that people are still showing up and listening to the show and listening to me geek out on podcasting. And it just makes my heart so happy to know that you are getting the tools that you need to share that special message that you have. So make sure to go check out the show notes and follow the podcast wherever you're listening. And I would love it. This would be so helpful if you would take a screenshot wherever you're listening to this episode and share it on social media. Tag me on Instagram. I would love to see what you thought about today's episode. If you have a podcast main theme or you were encouraged to create one, let me know. I want to hear from you. So tag me on social media and let me know what you thought. But as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.